10 years from now, when we look back at this time, what do you think we'll go, oh, that was our biggest mistake. That's the thing that we got wrong.
Well, you're talking about in terms of cloud computing, I think that when we look at what the open source community produces in terms of cloud computing solutions or just software in general, one of the things it doesn't necessarily take into account is what business users really focus on in terms of many of the types of requirements they have. So when we look at many of the most successful commercial software applications, there is no open source analog, for example. And one of the things I would love to see the cloud computing community, and especially on the open source side, focus on is the enterprise requirements. When I talk to CIOs and I talk to business leaders around the world, they still look at cloud computing primarily as an IT opportunity. They don't quite get the fact that it's not paving the cow path, as Tim said, and allowing me to virtualize my computer and put it somewhere else and cut costs. It's about being able to drive innovation. It's about being able to increase the agility in your organization. But it's also about making sure we have solutions that meet the needs around security and governance and many of the regulations that are now sprouting up around web technology in general, about where the data can be stored and so on. Many of the capabilities that are going to be needed, we need to bake into these platforms. And that's when we look at, I see the IBMs and the Ciscos of the world really be able to focus and zero in on that opportunity. And I think that would be a missed one if we didn't get that. I think that's the one that I see.
Yeah, I think there's probably going to be two mistakes we'll look back on. The first one, probably only in 5 years, is that we've forgotten about the network. Already we're seeing massive network congestion, particularly with mobile devices. And I think we really need to address that very soon because a lot of the goodness of cloud is going to go away. I mean, in only 2 years, I used to be back home going into London. I used to be able to get a reliable sort of megabit connection on my 3G card on my phone. These days, I struggle to get 50 kilobits. So I think that's one thing we'll have forgotten. The other, maybe more speculative, I'm a fan of Peter F. Hamilton. One of his less-known books is Misspent Youth, and he envisages something called the data sphere, where atomic-level storage has come about, and just all data is everywhere. And I think our mistake might be that we think we've solved it. And actually, I think we might see a redistribution again of data and processing power. Already we're seeing huge leaps forwards in terms of flash storage and compute resource and mobile devices. We might find that actually the data center's importance starts to diminish in a few years' time. But that's more of a speculative thought.
Good one, though.
I'll echo part of what Kate said, and I think that when remembering networks, the part of networks I want people to remember is upload speeds. Right? We lose everything to do with the cloud if we think it's this magical environment where things rain down and we don't worry about how it got there in the first place. We really have to think about the importance of symmetry and of upload speeds when we think of the cloud. But I'm more worried about a more generic case. I would feel like I need to slit my throat if I saw the cloud equivalent of region coding on a DVD or QWERTY. Okay? My big fear and why I spoke the way I did this morning about biomimicry was that if we are not careful, we're going to make compromises today that corrupt the cloud, and we will continue to be paying for them 10 years from now because we've hidden behind the skirts of SLAs and security and commercial models or whatever else. But we've taken the concept of the cloud and not just corrupted it, but corrupted it for eternity, because today, 10 years after I was angry about it, I still see region coding on a DVD. I don't know how many decades it's been since QWERTY was used to slow down a typewriter. Right? It is still there. No one's been able to come up with a replacement. The problem with solving problems is that the workaround embeds itself far longer than you would like to. So I'm very, very worried about the nature of society today to find the wrong workarounds because we still have vendor power to influence people's thoughts, to create workarounds they don't need.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on the first thing that JP said, which is about the symmetry of uploads. I remember watching The Matrix, and I thought, oh my God, could those, could that giant computer in the sky really think of nothing better to do with people than use them as batteries? These guys really don't get it. Because of course, if you look at these apps, we are used. We are part of the machine that we're building. And I really do think that this, the fundamental nature of contribution, by users to cloud apps, the way that we generate data simply by, to use Wallace Stevens' wonderful phrase, living as and where we live, is so central to that future. Absolutely. And it isn't just the data that we create by typing on keyboards, it's the data exhaust just by living, that's increasingly going to inform our applications. And so that leads me to one of the big areas where I think we could make some big mistakes. And we see this right now in the, all of the flap about privacy that was been hitting Facebook and Google and the like. And I look at those problems, and for example, the Facebook debacle was a debacle of informed consent, not a debacle of privacy. Facebook basically changed the terms without telling people and retroactively. But what it's leading to is the potential government backlash that we have to clamp down. And yet, look at all the benefits that could come when new kinds of application areas could have the feedback loops that we see, for example, in search, where basically someone like Google is taking all kinds of data sources and using them to deliver better results. And you think about something like healthcare. I've had conversations with people at the Department of Health and Human Services where they're talking about all the data they have for Medicare about costs and outcomes, and it's like you go to this hospital, you're going to spend 3 times as much, and you're going to have a worse outcome. Yet they can't use that data to instrument the system. They can't use that data to actually adjust, algorithmically in real time the reimbursements or direct people to a different institution or whatever because of privacy fears. Because they might, somebody might discover that Aunt Jane has cancer, and that would be some kind of privacy disaster. And you go, why is that a privacy disaster? Well, it's a privacy disaster because the insurance companies would throw out Aunt Jane and she couldn't get coverage. Maybe we need to solve that problem instead. So back to you, that kind of leads me to JP's second point, is like, we may be solving the wrong problem in a lot of these cases. And we have to go back and try our best to rethink a lot of fundamental areas in light of where technology is going and what this future is going to look like.
And some of those issues are actually, more anthropological, more social than they are actually technical. We have the tendency to simplify and think it's technology, but it's actually us.
So one of the things you mentioned there was government backlash. I mean, JP, going back to the earlier example of biological systems, where all this complexity is built from standard components underneath it, whether the DNA, the amino acids, the transcription, translation processes. So componentization, as we discussed, causes an explosion of innovation, etc. But most industries which have gone through that commoditization stage have had this mess of different ways of doing things. We saw the example, James, was it James, did you do the gauges, or Sam Johnson did the different railway gauges? So the question is, do you think the government is going to have to legislate in this space? Do you think we're going to see formation of, good competitive marketplaces, or do you think the government's going to have to get involved in what's happening in the cloud?
I think that some form of legislation is probably unavoidable, but the nature of the legislation has to be sure that we're solving the right problem. So sometimes I look at the net neutrality debate, and I look at the privacy and confidentiality debate, and I think they're sisters under the skin. That the first issue is actually transparency, right? If something is completely symmetrical in terms of access to data, and everyone can see it all the time, then symmetrical access, while it is known, cannot be misused. Where access is asymmetrical, and you aren't aware somebody else is able to see that data, right? That's what causes blackmail. That's what causes insider trading. That's what causes a lot of the evils to do with data because you have somebody having asymmetrical access to it. And so transparency and open access, and where not open, because I fully take into account the need to protect the data in some cases, but the mindset shift of saying it, you start open and then move towards closed where appropriate, is hugely different from starting closed and drilling tunnels and I don't know what else through to make a complete pig's ear of the data in the first place. But when we legislate, we should be legislating about the principles of transparency, of open access, understanding the business models, rather than making Facebook the butt of that kind of environment. Because I was born and brought up in Calcutta. My concept of privacy is quite different from the concept of privacy of people in this room.
Yeah, but we know you're confused of Calcutta.
Well, some do. But my children and their willingness to share is different. So I think we have to be very careful that when we do this legislation, and I'm taking the way you said it, Tim, that it's not just solving the wrong problem, but solving the wrong problem for the wrong generation. Okay? Problems are also temporal. So let's not decide because my generation is in the lawmaker's seat that we think it's the problems we perceive that are important, but understand what the digital native is actually facing and what they want to see as solutions. My daughter, I've got children of 12, 18, 24. They don't actually expect me to be poking around their Facebook pages. They're friends with me, but there is an implied expectation that dad doesn't go snooping around there. And if they saw me do that, they'd be horrified, because that's not the basis of the relationship. Now, enshrining that in law is unnecessary. It's actually social convention that's required. So we've got to be very careful that we don't make the laws about the wrong things.
Yeah, could we get away from the kind of the legal discussion? I'd love to talk a little bit more about some of you have these wonderful complex diagrams, Kate. It does seem to me that if you looked at an architecture diagram for a processor, or you looked at an architecture diagram for an operating system, they're also pretty damn complex. Because at the end of the day, this is hard stuff we're trying to do, and
part of the reason we're trying to do it and worry about the complexity is so that everyone else doesn't have to.
That's right. And I guess it seems to me that what I saw in those diagrams is kind of the beginning of this next stage of what we have to do, which is, okay, if we assume that applications are going to be running on these big cloud platforms, and maybe ultimately cloud platform, which is sort of this, the superset of all these things interoperable, working together in some way. We are going to have to start solving in code some of the higher level issues like privacy or data integrity, and it seems like there's a really wonderful entrepreneurial opportunity to, for example, say, okay, here's my cloud and it knows about these kinds of business rules, and bang, it's done, it's taken care of.
Yeah, but I think fundamentally that will end up being, as you said, an enterprising opportunity.
Yeah.
I don't think government should. I think they probably will go and try and legislate. I think they'll almost certainly get it wrong.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Take for example, anyone who's used IRC, there's always the danger that you say something negative about somebody and it gets posted on bash.org, for the world to see. That sort of issue's been around for a long time, but again, it's a generational thing.
Yeah.
The teenagers now, I've privileged to know a handful, they have a very different attitude to it, and they're willing to accept the risks, and they're careful about what information they put out there. And then I think we'll see, the successors to Facebook, which will inevitably come about. There'll be some where there's more control over privacy for those who want that. There'll be some where it's a more open community for those who want that. But again, I think I'd go back to what you were saying about the complexity. That complexity can happen behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely.
With just the users selecting the service they want. And I think for us or for government to go and poke their noses into that, it would be a bad thing. Really.
Totally agree, and I think that's why I think it's so important that as technologists, we create mechanisms, in the code, in the systems that start to think about these use cases. And again, that kind of goes back to your comment about business. because I think businesses are going to drive a bunch of those requirements. We can't use this technology unless it does X, Y, Z for us, and that X, Y, Z is often meets certain kinds of requirements for integrity and auditability and privacy and so on. So it's going to be kind of an interesting question of how that gets addressed technically, and how businesses start to compete on the basis of how well they do those higher level functions.
And I think that kind of contextual awareness is actually a business opportunity for cloud providers to say, look, we understand where users are coming from, what the local laws are, what the local requirements are, and we can automatically do that. And again, aligning that complexity so that people can focus on their businesses and what they're trying to get done, rather than trying to figure out, hey, I have users coming in from Italy. What are the EU privacy laws, and where does that user
and the
registration
cultural
data?
differences as well.
Yes, and the cultural differences. So I think that context awareness, the fact that more and more devices are so location aware, and they have so many essentials, and they actually know a great deal that they can then provide to make sure that the application experience, the user experience is much better. So I think there is opportunities there.
Yeah, I think this whole question of location really does is such a keystone, because it can bring in many different elements, even to the legal framework, as you say.
But that's where even the current legal framework is weak in terms of saying, if you accept the premise that data is the new black, we have rules about the import and export of data that were built for the 19th century. And in a global infrastructure, you start creating new trade barriers, new blocks on, and I don't mean sort of Google in China, I mean the general principles of nations insisting that data associated with their citizens must reside in the country, and what that actually means in the age of the internet, because whenever you're looking at something, you're technically making a copy in the first place. So what does that residence mean?
Well, there's other location issues that I think are really interesting too. You think about Wall Street and other financial markets as people who are really on the cutting edge of all this stuff. I mean, they've been living in their data centers, and you look at how much money is made by basically timing arbitrage, for example.
Latency is a big deal.
And so if it's true there, where else is that going to be true? You can easily see that in consumer e-commerce. I know sort of consumer e-commerce sites that are sort of in doing things with offers. This company called NextJump, for example, has this program called Overwhelming Offers, and people compete to get timing advantage on taking the offers because they know there's only going to be 10 of them or 50 of them, and so they're kind of win points, so they will get the half-second advantage.
But again, it's down to user choice, really. I might be willing to pay more to play a computer game with the low latency because the servers are near where I actually live. Equally, UK government will be willing to pay a premium to store its citizens' medical records on British mainland, where it might cost a little bit more, but who cares? And I think that's what we shouldn't forget with cloud. Yes, though you can have the really grand vision of sort of data being anywhere and flowing around the world, but for some people, they're going to want it nearby, and it may be completely irrational. In the case of a lot of corporate data, it really doesn't matter where it is probably, but maybe they just feel comfortable with the fact that they're spending a bit more money to have it in their basement. And if they want to do that, then I don't think we should necessarily stand in their way.
Oh, I'm relaxed about the choice. I'm more concerned about regulation. Right? Choice is always there. People want to have a local copy, fine. People insist that they want on-premises, fine. Right? Choice is everything. But to do that because of regulation, the regulation at a layer of abstraction looks very much like trade barriers.
So
okay?
Can we go back up? Maybe I'm taking over, and I should let... we have a question here?
Hello? Just real quick, throughout the day, there's been discussions that says that we have to get beyond the definition of what cloud computing is, and some people say we need to define what it is. To me, it's kind of confusing about how does it get into the enterprise? Is it something that we see like, does it go through entrepreneurs? Entrepreneurs build companies, and that's how we get it? Or is it like through open source where hackers bring it into the enterprise, and then the IT people say, oh, this is something we need? Because it seems to be there's perhaps this potential for confusion about, at least in the industry, what it is, how do I get my hands onto it, how do I learn about it? Can you elaborate on that?
I'll take a stab at that. So what we see with enterprises doing early cloud computing pilots, what seems to stand out is that there's a general willingness to adopt the cloud computing technologies, whatever they may be. Most large enterprises are not willing to use Amazon as a vendor. They just don't have any experience with them. They don't have a track record. Even though they've been doing this for years, what they really want is someone like an IBM, let's say, but they don't have a track record either, so now they're back to square one. The situation you have also is that there are more de facto standards around cloud than there are real standards that are actually usable today. So this puts a lot of organizations on the fence. They want to use the technologies. They see the potential in all the different ways cloud computing can benefit them, at least the person who's trying to bring it in. But right now, most organizations are far from saying, I'm willing to use public cloud. Mostly right now, this is a technology adoption discussion around what tools, what approaches, what standards are we going to do pilots with and experiment with internally that will give us the flexibility down the road. Now, I do see that a lot of companies that add value to, like, let's say Amazon provide the enterprise management consoles and some of the interesting components they're looking for. That entrepreneurial technology and those products do seem to be making their way into the enterprise. But anyway, that's a limited picture, but that's what I've seen so far.
Okay, so we've got a question over here. Hang on.
I'm pretty new to the cloud technology, and what struck me was whoever said a while ago that it was first an IT solution. We're in a situation where we are a private company building a private cloud for our own use, and I'm wondering about open source solutions for extracting that data. Maybe it's just the APIs that people have been talking about, but are there business intelligence and analytical tools on the horizon for cloud computing? Once we get the data in, we got to get it out.
Let me just say one thing about data portability and the ability to extract your data. I am a big fan of data portability in one sense. I believe our ability to delete our data from somebody's site, ability to take back something that we stored there is really important. But I don't think we should kid ourselves either, because one of the important things about the future is that our data is more valuable when it's together with other people's data. You sort of imagine, for example, leaving, Facebook, or leaving, for that matter, think about your phone and your address book. Your network is what matters to you. And yeah, you could take your data out of everybody's address book, but then they couldn't call you, and yeah, maybe sometimes you want that, but generally, I think we're heading for a world in which, more and more of our stuff is going to be online, and it's only going to be valuable when it's there, when it's shared. And, in some sense, it's kind of like it's a good moral check mark to say I want to be able to extract my data and I really own it. But in practical terms, I'm not sure it's going to matter as much as we think it does.
I disagree with that, actually.
Really?
And also, I think you can actually have the best of both worlds. You don't necessarily have to have a private cloud to control your data. We're seeing a real trend with our customers. Remember, I'm an infrastructure provider mainly, but they're coming to us, getting some infrastructure, and then going and getting some open source software like Sugar CRM or TrackWiki, and then deploying that on our infrastructure. So they're not reliant on us. They're only reliant on us for the hosting. They're not reliant on us to be able to extract the data. They can go to a third party for that. But it is ring-fenced. It's their data still. We don't have any hold over it. It's entirely theirs, and it's secured. Now, they are sharing it with their organisation internally, so I would agree with you as far as that it's good. But
I just want to kind of, I think, obviously there's countervailing forces here, but I just, I think about, again, I go back to, one of the really interesting features of my phone, is that once I added the Facebook app, my address book here became more useful. Now I'm about to text message somebody and I see their latest status update from, from Twitter, which was actually gatewayed through to Facebook, which is and then gatewayed through to my phone. I get their photo from, and I go, okay, there's all this sort of this mesh that's starting to happen of applications that are drawing data from multiple sources. And that's not to say that there isn't some data that we go, this is really mine and really private, and I don't want to have it. But I look at the paradigm, of the old, sort of, here we have, Office docs, for example, and they're on our computer, and they're ours, and they're on our intranet, and how much of a challenge it was when, Lotus Notes first came out, or Groove, and Ray Ozzy's trying to sell the story of why it's going to be good to share documents. And now just how casual it is, I had 6 people working on a document the other day in Google Docs, and I was working on my laptop, but I was going to actually use my iPad as a sort of my little cheat sheet for it, and it sort of automatically updated from multiple sources because it's in the cloud, and how everybody's just now taking that for granted. And, it's like, how do you start to take, what does it even mean to own a document? So many of the documents that I work on with other people, it doesn't belong to any one organization. It doesn't belong to me anymore.
But to give you a specific example, my internal wiki is in the cloud. Okay, it's in my data center. All my staff can edit it, but it is extremely heavily protected because I don't want my competitors to be able to see what, say, certain configurations we use, certain systems we use for deployment. So in the business context, there are sometimes reasons for being very protective within a certain community.
Absolutely. All I'm saying is that there's two hands and that both are going to be playing out.
But you've got to be careful with that. I mean, I'm told that in this country there are 800,000 people with the highest possible security clearance.
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay? If you want to keep something secret, don't tell anyone. If you'd like to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, don't put it on the web. Because once you use the infrastructure of the web, then you can have a disproportionate cost of making sure no one can see it. Because the concept, the WikiLeaks type organizations, why they've been able to exist is that, going back to the Kevin Kelly type definition, the internet is the world's biggest copy machine, right? That infrastructure we're using for many other things. And we have to be careful. As long as we start open and we'll build closed, we will still have the utility and we won't have a tragedy of the commons. The problem I'm worrying about is that we're so keen on making this open infrastructure closed because we want to use it for a variety of other purposes that we destroy that same infrastructure for the common good. And the same way as you were talking about, there is communal value of data when it is shared and it's enhanced, there's communal ownership. We have a whole new paradigm of communal use, communal ownership, communally created
But I think
data.
what Kate's saying is also very real. We need to understand what how do you actually own something? How do you protect something? How do you keep something for yourself?
But they're two different worlds.
No, I understand, but we have to figure it out.
That's the way the worlds will merge as well. So when some big businesses are recognizing that a wiki, a collaboratively edited set of documentation is a great way forwards, they're starting to embrace some of those technologies that they wouldn't previously have otherwise. And certainly, if there was only the possibility of having it completely open, they never would have taken that step. So I think there is a merging.
Yeah. So.
Okay, so James.
This is a perfect segue to my question. So you guys are the perfect panel to kind of bounce this off of. So one of the things I've thought about quite a bit is we tend to think of cloud computing in the analogy of a utility. But from the operating of a cloud service perspective, I wonder if the better analogy isn't one of a profession, much like a doctor or a medical organization, much like a lawyer, with a code of ethics, with a set of guidelines around what it takes to get into the profession, what it takes to, what is expected of those in the profession, and the organizations that hire these professionals, of course, being held accountable at the right level. And even potential concepts like malpractice, right, where a data center operator shares data that they shouldn't, or fails to, or loses data, something along those lines, is actually something that has real, punitive effect as well. And if that, what is your thought? Is that, in terms of what you were saying about not, not really being able to trust that the things you put out on the internet will stay protected, could we build a culture in which there are elements of our society that are expected to take care of that situation, and that there's consequences if they don't.
I love that analogy. And it's a fresh way of thinking about this as, there may not be a technical solution. It may be that we need a code of ethics, and we need sort of a common set of assumptions about how people act, and then consequences if they fail to act in those ways, rather than somehow we're magically going to be able to build the Maginot Line that's going to keep.
Right.
I think it's in two parts. I mean, before you can do that, you need something that looks like a Bill of Rights or a Citizen's Charter, because the behavior of anyone who provides service must respect something common in the first place, which is what is a citizen's right within the digital environment. And once you've established that, what's national and what's global about that, then people can overlay a series of professional services in virtual guilds and councils, some self-certifying, some requiring external certification. So the model is sound, but I think the first building block is understanding the human right and which part of that scales, which part of that travels.
Perfect, thank you.
And that's actually also roughly what we're going towards with the G-Cloud program. One of the requirements will be a set of, a code of practice placed upon suppliers in order for them to be able to provide services into the government's cloud. And at the moment, that isn't available. So that will be one of the instances of, or at least we haven't seen many examples of the consumer driving the provider. And I think we'll probably see that in any sort of new service field.
Well, and I would hope it would be a little bit like e-commerce, where it was largely and still largely is self-policing, self-governing, and it's up to websites to prove they have the good emblems of housekeeping that we're continuously analyzed for our level of quality and our service and our security and everything that we do, and that's been good enough so far. I'd hope that we follow that road as opposed to the other routes, which I think our legislation leads to much more difficulty than doing it ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, you can have assurance services for exchanges, etc. You don't have to require legislation. Jesse.
Hi, so I'm Jesse Robbins. I'm the CEO of OpsCode, and I'm also the chair of the operations conference that O'Reilly runs. You guys have said a couple of times, you've talked about business logic and sort of the emergence of business logic and whether or not cloud providers are going to become really aware of that. And I actually wanted to pose a slightly different perspective on that and maybe get your thoughts. So in the operations community, we're beginning to see something which we call infrastructure as code. We look at that a lot when we see automation, and we're seeing a lot of frameworks emerge. My company makes one. There are many others, all of which are sort of moving into this common place of pushing the business logic up the stack. And I actually believe that it's one of the places where we are closest to seeing the problem get solved in the near term and sort of a common understanding. Anytime you say configuration or you say automation or you say sort of figuring out where data is supposed to live, I think that that tool set is a lot closer to getting resolved because there's so much open source innovation and there's so much standardization beginning to happen, not in terms of standardization bodies, but we're just seeing practices emerge in many, many different areas. So given that, I guess my question is, what do you guys think the important places for companies are to focus today? So where is it that you think people are going to need to sort of build an operating competence in order to make better decisions as they go forward? So it's assuming that the business logic problem is solved. What's next?
Well, I think if we look at the services, the cloud continuum is more than just infrastructure, computing and storage. It's everything that we use as a service through an API, and that includes open APIs, which is actually almost a larger story. It's the whole horizontal layer, and we see companies like Mashery and Sonoa. If you look for, I've actually looked for open source equivalents. Well, they provide all the things you need to take your business and make it and cloud enable it so that people can plug their own businesses into it. And this is that whole innovation, drives all that innovation assembly that we see. So I think infrastructure and cloud computing is very interesting, but it's not, there's a much larger part of the spectrum. And I do see a relative low level of maturity in terms of the frameworks and libraries and other things that are available that are like, there's no Rails equivalent for cloud infrastructure, right? That I'm aware of anyway. I will understand to be corrected. So I think there's a lot of potential there to do all those things, and I think there's an enormous potential for open source right now. There's a big open opportunity.
I have a potentially contentious view on that. We actually made a decision when we founded the company. I'm not saying we were a very successful little business, growing extremely fast without external funding. We made a conscious decision not to pay anyone ever for any license fees, and not to use any external software. No ERP, nothing like that, just to pluck bits of open source software, bits of cloud infrastructure, and wed it together with our own central core database. We've got a small team of developers using Python, MySQL, a little bit of Perl, but we're gradually phasing that out, and Django. And that's sort of in fantastic stead. It means we have a system that does exactly what we want. Our business logic is neatly encoded. We don't have to fight with somebody else's system. So I think I would actually hazard that the really successful businesses will be those who have some trained in-house developers that are able to stitch together their own system.
I mean, without repeating what I said in the morning, I would concentrate on looking at 21st century games developers and looking at how they handle three things: transmedia, the ability to go nonlinear, and how they do those two things in scale. Learning how to do that will actually form the bedrock of the enterprise of the future. The enterprise is not ready for it, but we're failing as enterprises to deal with today's problems, which is high-speed change, burstiness, lumpiness, and an unpredictability. And we're using sequential, linear, sort of 19th century ways of dealing with it. And we will see more of companies falling flat on their face regularly when actually the infrastructure is beginning to evolve. Because if you go look at how these games are being developed, if you look at how they are run, many of them are actually, going back to Kate, are already making decisions that say, we aren't interested in the proprietary. They're quite capable of providing many of these tools. So, I wish I had the time to just give up everything else I'm doing and watching how those games are going to permeate the enterprise of the future.
When I think about the capabilities that are going to be required, I guess I would say more of what we already know we need. Right now, there are a relatively small number of applications that need, incredibly low latency and, real time. There are a relatively small number of applications that need to deal with massive data sets and extract, relevance from them immediately. But I think that set is going to expand enormously. And then the class of problems that now seem like edge cases are going to become central. And so, the name of the conference that you run, Velocity, is, I think, a lot about this sort of real-time speed aspect of operations is, I think, still going to be central. Jeff Jonas, who's such a great thinker about big data, did this fabulous commercial for IBM, where he now works, in which he said, would you like to cross the street with data that was even a minute old? It's like there's going to be more and more circumstances where we're going to have to pull so much stuff together. And so, the competencies of dealing with a lot of stuff in real time and algorithmically, not just, but having that whole support layer for people to build applications that just work and don't fail, that don't have the fail whale at a critical time. Because if you have the fail whale, you literally are dead, we're going to have that. Our cars, it's like you can't have a car that blue screens, when you're going 75 miles an hour. You can't have an airplane that blue screens when you're trying to land. And we're going to have an awful lot of applications that are, we're going to have more applications that are like that than not.
Okay, we have a question here.
Okay, thanks. I know it's been said much, but once again, about privacy. Have you any ideas or maybe recipes how to make businesses use cloud technologies faster? I'm talking about the public cloud services, not the private ones. Or is it essential technology aging when with time industry and enterprise learn that it's not as scary to store information inside the cloud if it's not on the corporate side, if it's situated somewhere in a data center miles away? What do you think?
I would just say any company's not sure that they're already doing that quite a bit should do an audit to see how much software as a service they're already using internally. World Bank did a review, I think it was a year ago, and found that every department was using some type of SaaS application in direct violation of IT policy, but simply because they're out of desperate need for better tools than the ones that they were being given. And I think we call this phenomenon shadow IT, and it's more and more common because we now have better IT on our smartphones than we have at work very often. And blocking anything on your desktop means nothing because you can move it to your own devices. And so right now, companies are doing this more often. There was a report that came out last week that said that 36% of enterprises are actually using public cloud. They just don't know it.
Yeah, I really strongly agree with that. And it sort of comes to back to the other question that was asked earlier. We see two modes of new customers. On one hand, there's the CIO, or more commonly the financial director, has basically said, right, we need to outsource to save money, go and try this cloud thing. More commonly, though, somebody's come along, they've bought a virtual machine, sometimes on a personal credit card, to just do something because they can't be bothered to wait around for IT to deploy it, or maybe they just want some sort of SaaS solution and it's just quick and easy and they don't want to go through the whole procurement process. And that's sort of almost a subversive activity of let's just go and use it on the quiet. So I'd say, yeah, go and find the examples that are already there within the organization, shine a light on them and say, look, we're already using it and it's working and it's safe.
Yeah, I think it's got a lot to do with trust. Right? It hasn't actually got to do with the public cloud. It's got to do with perceptions of trust. Okay? Most conferences I speak at, I ask people two questions. How many people in the audience think that the web is insecure? Hands up, please. How many people think the web's insecure? Okay? How many people in the last 6 months have used the web for financial transactions? Okay? Don't understand. Okay?
Or don't care.
Well,
the choice.
I know my own answer to that, but the issue I'm trying to say is that
it's quite okay when we're speaking about personal data because people get used to Facebook and everyone see what they're doing online, and even if they lose some amount of money on their credit card, it's not good, but they could say it's okay. But if we're talking about some corporate data which costs tens or hundreds millions, it's just the other case. So it's really hard to talk to enterprise, talk to companies and tell them that they won't lose the data that is critical to their business.
Well, I think Dion was talking about it earlier. You don't trust Amazon yet because you're not used to.
Right.
Okay? Yeah. It's not the technology that's actually the question. It's the nature of the track record of the relationship, and that's already emerging. And then if you go back to what Kate was saying, it's happening at two levels. One, people are doing it anyway, right? So it's not being reported. And two, there is a percentage of people who are actually doing it formally, and that's gathering momentum. Right? And the switch is not that we've got technically better. The switch is we're more willing to accept it.
Yeah, there is another minor issue as well, which I've seen several examples of, where the CTO sees their empire about to be being eroded because they're going to lose their data center, it's all going to get outsourced, and they trump up some of these reasons about security in order to convince the CEO that we need to keep our own data center. And I think that's something that we'll continue to see for some time, unfortunately.
So we've only got a few moments left, so I'm going to just take a couple, see if we can combine a few questions together. Simon Phipps, you've been waiting patiently. You had a question?
It was from long back in the conversation. been watching the discussion today, I noticed there haven't been very many hackers on the stage.
Okay.
And I've noticed that there hasn't been a lot of talk of community. And I wonder if the panel believes that there is a role for the sort of grassroots movement that created open source in 1998, 1999 in the cloud era now.
Michael, did you have a question as well? No, that's fine. So we've only got a minute left. So I would ask you, do you think that there is an important role to be played by a grassroots community in the cloud, an open source community in the cloud? And also, any final thoughts on what you think the cloud is going to be? Where do you think it's going to be in the next 10 years?
Sure. So I'll take a stab at the community part first. We do see around certain types of cloud services, communities being formed. These can be crowdsourcing types of services. I think the most interesting one that has a very strange community around it, but it seems quite effective, is what Amazon's doing with, with Mechanical Turk. They've literally wrapped an API around their customers, anybody who wants to participate, and you can literally access them programmatically. And it sounds rather impersonal, yet some very innovative products are being created by it, and a lot of people are avid suppliers to that Amazon supply chain. So it's not the community we would necessarily think, but I think if you look at things like CrowdSpring, and there are many other, like UTest, which brings a community around using testing as a service. It does really amazing things. So I think there's innovative ways to use community in cloud, but it's not going to look like the open source types of community that we've seen, except in the case where you're building cloud software using the open source model. The other thing I would really add in closing was that there is significant opportunities that we need to articulate to business leaders. It says this isn't about a new data center. This is about a fundamentally new way of thinking about how to deliver our services. And one of the best things to do, and I wish I'd thought of it when the question was asked, was how do I get our internal leaders excited about it? Well, show them something they can't do any other way. There are very interesting solutions. To answer one of the other questions, IBM has a service called Smart Cloud that says, look, give us your data. We'll combine it with your industry, and we'll do business intelligence in the cloud. We'll do data warehousing, and it's a brand new product, and no one knows how popular it is, but it shows the types of things that are only possible using cloud models, and I think that's what we need to shine the light on. I think that's the point that Tim has been trying to make as well.
Any other final comments to add?
I've got a quick one to answer
Very
both.
quick.
I think that one grassroots community, and particularly the academic community, will probably end up being the future of the cloud in the form of ubiquitous computing. I think that's where ubiquitous computing will really start, where people work out how to contribute their compute resource in their phone, in their fridge, in their light bulb, into a communal cloud. And again, to refer to another of my favorite authors, Charles Stross, in Halting State, which is a book all of you should read, he talks about the zone games, where it's basically a massive distributed grid of mobile phones that are used to run huge virtual worlds, where basically we are all forming part of the cloud. So yeah, I think community is definitely where it's going to be.
I think the biggest opportunity is in the ability of the firm to engage with its customers. And Tim was talking earlier about location aware and augmented reality and the kind of power that is implied in that. If you really understand what that community represents, if you can take the latency out of the customer being able to have a conversation with the company, and it requires new sets of tools. New problems are going to emerge because you're talking about mobile, ubiquitously connected customers, and no community is better than the open source community at solving very large-scale generic problems at point levels. The new problems will emerge as the customers are given the opportunity to engage, and new solutions will come from the open source community because they are best placed to even analyze that in that kind of context.
So what I would just say is the most exciting thing about the future is that it hasn't happened yet and that we get to shape it. And I think it's a pretty wonderful time to be a technologist because we are at the beginning of an unimaginable new world. And our job is to imagine it, and to imagine it into reality. And I hope that all of you take that challenge seriously and own the responsibility of being the creators of the future that we are collectively building.
And on that fantastic note, thank you very much. Please put your hands together for our panelists.